airplanes and
Drones.
that would fly on top of that. And so they wouldn't have had, that artist would not have had to put very much detail into the top of that statue. And yet, now that 100 years later, more than that, we do have drones. If you look at pictures, you can see that there is a lot of detail on the top of the Statue of Liberty. There are waves in the hair. And so that was an artist that said, no one's going to see this, but I'm going to do a good job anyway.
Yeah.
In a positive, those are good secrets. I mean, there are bad secrets that God sees us doing that people should know about.
Right.
But, Satan can keep us to get caught in things that should be out in the light. But there should be
good deeds and things that you're doing that you don't have to have recognition.
Right.
For.
Things that
doing your job well.
That's right. Well, things you're doing that no one sees but God. And the reality is that God saw David's heart being a good shepherd and knew that that's the kind of heart he could use.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we talked about Psalms being the place where we can read David's journal, per se. So we've been digging in the Psalms through this study. But I found a Psalm 78. It's not written by David. It's written by Asaph, who was the director of music during David's reign, or part of David's reign. But, we talked about in Acts how they talk about, we're going to tell the story. We're going to keep telling the story. And so this is what Asaph is doing in Psalm 78. He's telling the story. In verse 4 through 7, he says, "We will not hide them from their children. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, his power and the wonders he has done. And he decreed statutes for Jacob and established the law in Israel, which he commanded our forefathers to teach their children, so the next generation would know them, even the children yet to be born, and they would in turn tell their children. Then they would put their trust in God and would not forget his deeds, but would keep his commands." And so, they didn't have the written scripture, a lot of them. They were passing it down verbally to each other. And so they were telling the story of God's rescue. And then he goes on in Psalm 78, it's a long psalm. He goes on to tell the story about them being rescued from Egypt and being in the desert and, the story of the Israelites. But at the very end of Psalm 78, he goes into the part that we're studying. And in verse 65, it says, "Then the Lord awoke from his sleep as a man wakes from the stupor of wine. He beat back his enemies. He put them to everlasting shame. Then he rejected the tents of Joseph. He did not choose the tribe of Ephraim, but he chose the tribe of Judah, Mount Zion, which he loved. He built his sanctuary like the heights, like the earth that he established forever. He chose David, his servant, and took him from the sheep pens. From tending the sheep, he brought him to be the shepherd of his people Jacob, of Israel, his inheritance. And David shepherded them with integrity of heart, with skillful hands he led them." So I think this is purposeful, that he needed a shepherd.
Yeah.
That God needed a shepherd for his people.
Mm-hmm.
And so he took David from the sheep pen. He found a good shepherd that he could rely on. And, a shepherd is one that guides, it leads. The shepherd was intimately involved with the flock, concerned for the safety of each individual sheep or lamb, I guess. And he was willing to sacrifice his own comfort for the sake of the sheep, even his own life. David tells the story about saving them from a lion and a bear. But it reminded me when Jesus talks about being a shepherd in John chapter 10, when Jesus says, John 10 verse 11, "I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd who owns the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand that cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep." So, Jesus is a shepherd. And so God needed someone to shepherd his people, because then Jesus is going to come and be the good shepherd. And, I've heard before that this word good here means perfect, that he's the perfect shepherd that is willing to lay down his life. And he does. We know that he does. He lays down his life for his sheep. And so I think God needed a shepherd.
Yes, and he found one that was quietly doing his job well.
Right.
And God was preparing him during those times while he was out in the pasture with the real sheep to someday be able to be a good king and shepherd his people. And I think that's the lesson for us. Wherever we find ourselves right now, we don't have to understand what is going on, but God's preparing us. And if we're doing our job well, no matter who sees, God sees, and he's giving us the tools that we're going to need later to be useful for him if we let it. I think that I would like to end this by reading in 1 Corinthians verse 26, where it says, "Consider your calling, brothers and sisters. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. Not many of you were powerful. Not many of you were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God."
Thanks for listening and journeying with us on this side of the ceiling. See you next time.